Right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me on this important anniversary. I'm just taken aback by Janet and Aaron and Brett's presentations. I'm here to talk about something a little different, but I think there are good connections between the conversation that we should have had about and should still have about nuclear weapons and the conversations we need to have about other technologies right now. Um, you know, Hiroshima is a strong example of how technology can be used for bad, horror. Um, Whether you're talking about nuclear weapons or killer robots, technology takes the ability of humanity to be horrible to each other and increases it in a tremendous way. We also know that technology can be used for good. And whether that's the moments we have right now where we're watching in real time the protests for the Black Lives Matter movement because people have cameras on their phones and the ability to upload video, or the efforts that we see out halfway around the world in Hong Kong to try to stand up for human rights there as well. The world isn't just about tech good or tech bad. It's all about what we do with the technology, and that puts the responsibility back on us. And implementing human rights require us to navigate that and to have to deal at a level of complexity that's a little that can be very, very difficult and challenging. Today the things that we're seeing with technology being dangerous are the killer robots, which Aaron talked about. So I'm not going to talk about too much, but I do want to talk a little bit about the underlying machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies underneath them, since I know a little bit about those as well, to try to explain why the concern about killer robots and autonomous weapons is so great. And as Aaron points out, being carried so much by scientists themselves. But I also want to talk about surveillance, because I think that one of the ways that we see technology being deployed against people in violation of their human rights right now is the use of surveillance. It's the automated license plate readers and the facial recognition technologies, and the government corporate partnerships like the Ring one, putting surveillance in everybody's home doorstep. That are creating the situations in which it's very, very difficult for us to actually maintain a democracy. When the government, the people in power, know everything about the people who are not in power, it makes it extremely difficult to engage in self-determination, to engage in democratic systems. And unfortunately, we have slowly built, sometimes for commercial purposes, but it doesn't really matter, the information's available to the government, a surveillance world that is very, very tough right now. That's why we cheer when we see the protesters in Hong Kong taking out the cameras that are ubiquitous in Hong Kong. That's why in Ukraine, when everyone who attended a protest against the Russians received a text message saying, "We know you were at the protest," it sent a chill down everyone's spine, both in the Ukraine and around the world. And of course, in the United States, the surveillance that we're seeing in response to the activism on the streets is very concerning. So I think that it's important for all of the people who've spoken here tonight but I think all of you listening, to think about where you want to sit in this story, because you can either be part of the solution or you're going to be part of the problem. It's not really a lot of space to be neutral at this particular point. So, and it was the realization that technology could be used for good or for evil that led to the founding of EFF. As my colleague Cory Doctorow has noted, you don't found an Electronic Frontier Foundation if you think everything is going to be magically great as a result of digital technology. We've seen from the 30 years, as thank you for the shout out, the 30 years that this organization has been around, we've seen censorship, corporate and government surveillance, and efforts to lock down and control information and innovators present from the very beginning. EFF was not founded on the naive belief that coming change would create a digital utopia. EFF took root because even from those early days, it was clear that powerful new digital tools could be used to hurt as well as to heal. EFF then was created to make sure that technology supports freedom, justice, and innovation for all the people of the world. And while there's a lot of darkness in the world right now, and certainly darkness in remembering what happened in Hiroshima, I think that we should remind ourselves that we win sometimes. We've accomplished a lot in the 30 years that EFF has been working to try to make the digital world work for you instead of against you. Along with cheering, of course, with the awarding of the Nobel Prize and the fine work that Erin and her group do. We've won some things in the digital world too, and I think it's important to remind ourselves of that because it can feel overwhelming and it can make people feel powerless. But we've stood up against bullies over and over again, and we've stood up to empower the users of technologies. We help secure, we all work together and help secure the protection of encryption technology. Now it's under threat right now, but encryption is the way that you have a private conversation in the digital age. And it was not at all open for us to use when EFF was founded 30 years ago, but we were able through a multi-pronged strategy involving litigation that I was lucky enough to be involved in, along with congressional work and public pressure and public conversation to free up encryption from government control. We established that code is speech, setting a very, very high bar for government regulations. Of course, that bar can be met, and it certainly can be met when human rights are at stake. But it allows people to maintain the control of the tools that they all rely on. We've built tools to help protect protesters. We've helped guides to help protesters understand how to protect themselves. We built tools to help make your browsing safer, and protected security researchers and tinkerers all across the world who better protect all of us. We've shamed and we've sued and we've pushed companies to stand with their users instead of spying on them, censoring them, and mistreating them. And we've investigated and exposed and worked to undermine the ugly underbelly of the surveillance business model. We've forced governments to provide information to us so that we're better prepared to turn around and grab control over surveillance. And we've stopped cold so many bad ideas in courts and legislatures that we really honestly have lost count. But I think it's important to remember that we have this power. We can grab a hold of things. We are not at the mercy of technology. We're not at the mercy of technologists. We're not at the mercy of the governments or the corporations who do this. And we do win. Now, the fights don't necessarily go away. Everything is a long-term battle. We still have big work to do. We've made sure that the Fourth Amendment protects your emails. We've made sure that the Fourth Amendment protects a lot of what you do online, but we still need to do much, much more. We've made sure that the Fourth Amendment begins to protect your location privacy, but we still have much work to do, and especially work when it comes to national security as an excuse for surveillance, and the long work that I and others have done to try to make sure that the NSA isn't sitting on the government backbone watching all of our traffic as it goes by. We still see police searching and seizing way too much, and having access to sophisticated tools. We're seeing police and private entities roll out facial recognition, which is an issue that I think all the people who are watching this ought to pay attention to. This is a technology that is extremely dangerous in a democracy in the hands of the government, because the one thing you cannot change very easily is your face. So the positive identification of people who are involved in political change, whether it's standing up against nuclear or Holocaust or fighting for human rights in places all around the world, facial recognition is just too dangerous. It's one of the few technologies that EFF has supported the banning of for government use. And of course, our fights to protect encryption go on. Every couple of years, the Department of Justice comes up with a new excuse for why they need to ban encryption or limit it or backdoor it. And every year, every time we bat them back down again, but it does feel a little like a whack-a-mole game. They show up again with a new excuse. So these are the kinds of things that we need to take control of, that we can take control of. We can work to build tools that are secure. We can work to not backdoor them. We can stand together to make sure people understand how to use these tools to protect themselves. Right now, there's a Supreme Court case that folks who are interested in this should be watching. It's called Van Buren. It's in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is one of the laws that gets used against people who try to do security research. And we're hopeful that we're going to take a bite out of that as well, just like we did on location privacy. So those are some of the victories that we've had and some of the fights that we're having right now. As the internet has grown, so have the issues that we've needed to address to build a future where technology supports justice, freedom, and innovation. And the biggest one, I think, right now is recognizing that technology that technology can't cure racism, and putting sophisticated technology on top of a racist society will double down on the racism. And this leads me to talking a little bit about machine learning and AI and why it's as dangerous in police activities as it is in autonomous weapons. Machine learning can do really incredible things, but it's only as good as the data you give it, and it's only as good as the inferences you ask it to make and train. And when it comes to deciding whether somebody's a combatant or a non-combatant, that's not something where there's a ground truth that you can train an AI on to the level where it's going to always be successful, and the consequences can be tremendous. In general, the way we think about machine learning at EFF and AI, they call it artificial intelligence. I think that there's still a ways to go before what we're seeing rolled out under the mantle of artificial intelligence actually is artificial intelligence. Most of it is machine learning and statistics. So forgive me, my grumpy old lady insistence on the right terminology. But machine learning tools can be very, very helpful when you know what the ground truth is and you're just trying to pick a pattern out of a mess of data. But those are a very limited set of problems. And it's tremendously important when we're thinking about machine learning systems. We think about who bears the consequences if they're wrong. And if the people who bear the consequences if they're wrong are not the people who are in control of and deciding to use the technology, that's when we should stop. So if government wants to look at its own, EFF is handling a case right now where we're trying to get information about the parole boards and whether the parole boards are racist in their decisions about who gets parole. That's a great use for machine learning, because we're trying to feed in the data about what government is actually doing so we can pull out the patterns in what government's actually doing and help government learn how it's doing. That's very different than using those same systems to try to decide who a person is or whether a person is likely to be a combatant or likely to be a criminal or likely to become up in a bad person in one way or another, maybe not a good candidate for a job. So I think it's important that we recognize that that machine learning and AI needs to have a complicated rubric for when we use it and when we don't use it. And we are nowhere near that rubric right now. That's why we were pretty happy to see a hold put on facial recognition by several major companies in the last couple of months, but a hold is not enough. We have to put systems in place. This is the thing we didn't do with atomic weapons. We didn't put a system in place to decide when and how sophisticated technologies could be used in war before they were used. And it put us behind the 8 ball in trying to decide to try to do some control. Now we've done, I think, heroic work trying to build controls from that start, but we cannot do the same thing with facial recognition. It's much, much later. We're much more sophisticated in our thinking, and we ought to be, and we ought to put it for good use. I think that right now, when we started with the internet, we had this idea that maybe we were going to be able to get to a blank slate, that we were going to be able to be free of some of the controls that existed in the offline world. I think it's fair to say that while we've done some good things there, we still have a long way to go. And I think the most important issue that we've seen is that the technical tools of government and corporate surveillance and censorship that we fight against are not applied equally. They are disproportionately aimed at and impact people of color in our society, especially in these times when technology is both helping us hold the powerful accountable and being used by governments we recognize that Black Lives Matter, and we pledge to redouble our efforts to beat back police surveillance and abuse, and to build and protect the tools that allow you to organize, assemble, and speak securely and without censorship. Whether it's Cisco helping build the Great Firewall of China that helps the Chinese government identify religious minorities, or the US government tapping into the backbone of the internet, or the tech giants who leverage their surveillance to track our every move, we need to seize the reins of power again. We've done it in the past, and we can do it again. EFF, as I said, turned 30 this year. We picked a lighthouse for the central image of our year-long celebration. You can see it behind me right now. I'm pointing the right way. My friend Sigmund, the sea monster here too, is also with us. And we did that because we are hopeful right now that while we're living in a time of turbulent and dark waters, our values and the work that we've done to try to help build a movement and empower that movement to take control of our technological future could mean that we have a better future than the one that we had than the times that led to the horrible Hiroshima bombing. So thank you so much for inviting me to this, and I'm very, very grateful to get to talk to you tonight.